When the war finally began to turn against Germany, thousands of captured Nazi soldiers found themselves being transported across the Atlantic, not to labor camps or battlefields, but to a place they had been taught to despise, America. The journey itself became their first revelation. From the moment they boarded U.S. naval ships, they were struck by the sheer organization, discipline, and technology that surrounded them. The ships were clean, efficient, and abundantly supplied, an image completely opposite to what Nazi propaganda had painted. For men raised under Hitler's regime, told that the United States was weak, chaotic, and racially degenerate, the experience was a direct assault on everything they had believed. Upon arrival, these prisoners of war were distributed among hundreds of camps across the United States, from the cotton fields of Texas to the forests of Wisconsin. Each camp followed the Geneva Convention, granting fair treatment, adequate food, and humane living conditions. To the captured Germans, it was nothing short of a paradox. They had expected brutality and revenge, but found decency and order. Instead of being starved or tortured, they were given warm meals, medical care, and even access to libraries and sports fields. It didn't take long for the reality to sink in. The enemy lived better than most German citizens. The bread was fresh, the milk was plentiful, and the guards, often teenagers from small American towns, were relaxed, respectful, and quietly confident. The prisoners, who had been indoctrinated to see Americans as soft and weak, now witnessed a society that functioned on cooperation rather than fear. The smallest details amazed them: the abundance of food, the friendliness of civilians, the racial diversity within the U.S. Army, and the sheer efficiency of American logistics. Inside the camps, the transformation began quietly. The first to change were the younger soldiers, those less rigidly tied to Nazi ideology. They began to ask questions. How could a country that supposedly lacked Aryan discipline manage to build such an enormous war machine? How could ordinary American workers, free citizens not bound by dictatorship, outproduce the German Reich in every category: tanks, planes, ships, and weapons? Gradually, curiosity replaced arrogance, and humility replaced hatred. Re-education programs soon followed. American officers introduced films, lectures, and newspapers designed to counter Nazi indoctrination. But the most effective lessons came not from propaganda, but from reality itself. The prisoners watched newsreels showing liberated concentration camps. Many refused to believe them at first, claiming the footage was staged. Yet, as the war drew to a close and letters from home confirmed the collapse of the Reich, denial gave way to guilt. The myth of German moral superiority shattered completely. Outside the camp fences, America's heartland pulsed with normal life. Churches, schools, bustling towns, and families untouched by the tyranny of a police state. On Sundays, local farmers would wave to the German laborers who worked their fields under contract. Some even invited them to family dinners, an act of kindness that stunned the former soldiers. For many, it was the first time they experienced genuine respect from a foreign enemy. These simple interactions, sharing coffee, repairing machinery, exchanging songs, did more to dismantle Nazi ideology than any formal lecture could. By late 1944, American commanders noticed a dramatic shift in behavior. The once defiant prisoners began volunteering for extra work, helping in kitchens, hospitals, and lumber mills. They took pride in their efficiency, not out of fear, but out of a growing admiration for the country that treated them as men, not monsters. One POW later wrote in his diary, "We learned more about freedom inside American fences than we ever did in Hitler's Germany." Perhaps the most symbolic moment came during Christmas of 1944, when several camps allowed prisoners to decorate trees and sing carols. The sight of German soldiers singing Silent Night, in harmony with American guards under the same roof, captured the strange beauty of this psychological transformation. Many of these young men, once agents of tyranny, now saw themselves as human beings again, capable of reflection, remorse, and hope. Session 1 closes with a simple truth: the American victory was not only military, but moral. The Germans had entered the camps as conquerors turned captives, but within months, they became witnesses to a different kind of power. A power that did not rely on fear, propaganda, or violence, but on freedom, dignity, and human decency. Their journey had just begun, but their old world had already ended. By 1945, the German prisoners of war in America had witnessed an entirely different reality than the one they had been taught to believe. They had arrived expecting weakness, scarcity, and moral decay, but instead found abundance, efficiency, and human dignity. The lessons they learned over the previous 2 years had already begun to reshape their understanding of society, power, and morality. The final stage of their transformation would come as they prepared to return home. The return to Germany was both physically and emotionally jarring. Prisoners traveled aboard the same Liberty ships that had impressed them on arrival, crossing the Atlantic once more. But this time, they were not awed by the machinery. They carried with them knowledge, experience, and a new worldview. Letters and diaries from the journey describe conversations about democracy, industrial efficiency, and civic responsibility. These were men who had once believed in racial hierarchy and authoritarian control. Now they were students of American success, trying to reconcile the society they had left with the one they would re-enter. Upon arriving in a Germany devastated by war, they saw the contrast between what had been promised by Nazi propaganda and what actually existed. Cities lay in ruins, infrastructure was destroyed, and resources were scarce. Yet the lessons learned in America were not lost. They had seen firsthand how a society could operate efficiently, provide for its citizens, and still maintain moral integrity. The comparison was undeniable. Germany's collapse was not due to a lack of bravery, but to the inefficiency, cruelty, and ideological rigidity of the Nazi regime. Many former POWs immediately sought to apply what they had learned. Agricultural techniques observed in Texas and the Midwest, including mechanized harvesters and irrigation systems, were adapted in their devastated hometowns. Factories once abandoned were rebuilt with a focus on production efficiency rather than coercion. German engineers and managers incorporated lessons from American factories, division of labor, assembly line optimization, and worker engagement. The seeds of the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of the 1950s, were planted by those who had witnessed prosperity in captivity. Perhaps the most profound impact was ideological. Former soldiers who had once embraced Nazi propaganda began to champion democratic values, civil responsibility, and human rights. Education programs they had attended in camps, including courses on history, economics, and English, allowed them to act as agents of transformation in their communities. Letters to American families, maintained for decades, reflected deep admiration for the society that had treated them with dignity. These men were no longer enemies. They were bridges between two nations, carrying lessons of tolerance, efficiency, and moral responsibility. The psychological effects were also long-lasting. Many POWs reported that exposure to American life had given them hope and a sense of possibility. Where fear and indoctrination once ruled, curiosity and critical thinking now guided their decisions. Prisoners who had once counted themselves as part of a ruthless war machine now became advocates for rebuilding a democratic Germany. They argued for policies based on merit, productivity, and equity, rather than ideology or coercion. Former camp newspapers, replete with essays on democracy, science, and civic life, became blueprints for post-war intellectual reconstruction. Beyond economic and political contributions, the cultural transformation was equally significant. Men who had grown up in totalitarian societies learned to respect individual freedom, creativity, and diversity. They had seen American workers of all races and genders excel side by side, contributing to a society that valued cooperation over hierarchy. Returning home, they challenged old prejudices, introducing more inclusive workplaces and educational reforms. The experience of being treated with humanity, even as enemies, left an indelible mark on their approach to life and leadership. By 1946, over 370,000 German POWs had returned from American camps. While they returned to a country in ruins, they carried a blueprint for reconstruction, a vision of a society that could combine freedom, efficiency, and human dignity. Many rose to prominent positions: diplomats, engineers, educators, and business leaders, often citing their American experience as the foundation of their philosophy. The reconstruction of West Germany, both economically and socially, owed much to the lessons learned by these men during captivity. The story of German POWs in America is a testament to the transformative power of observation and humane treatment. Their captivity, initially a consequence of war, became an educational and ideological journey. They returned not as broken men, but as witnesses to a society that balanced productivity with morality, strength with compassion, and freedom with responsibility. America's greatest victory, in this sense, was not measured in bombs or tanks, but in minds changed, enemies enlightened, and bridges built. The journey from Nazi soldiers to advocates of democracy demonstrates that sometimes the most lasting victories are not won on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of those who once opposed you. The German POWs returned home transformed, carrying the lessons of industry, humanity, and freedom to rebuild a nation that could rise from devastation stronger, wiser, and more just than before.